Welcome into another Inside Carolina Postgame podcast. I'm Tommy Ashley. That's Sherrell McMillan. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. Florida 90, Carolina 84. Sherrell, we were talking just a little bit off the air. Feels like we've done this podcast before. In fact, multiple times this year alone. Carolina lays an egg in the first half, gets their manhood questioned or whatever happens in the locker room. They come out, they play a little better, and then they revert back to the things that end up killing them in the end. Florida goes on that late run to take a win in the Jumpman Invitational. Sherrell, what'd you see before we dig into it?
Yeah, I saw something that was emblematic, I think, of the entire program. And right now it feels a little listless. It feels a little rudderless. It feels like the program is just stale and isn't quite sure what it wants to do. And that's kind of how the team played. I mean, for the first half, again, as you said, just an inexplicable, embarrassing performance in the first half. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And then I think the coaches would say the same thing. Like, that was the effort, the attention to detail, all the things that they preached just was not there in the first half. And then it makes you wonder when they come out in the second half and within, what was it, 2.5 minutes, the lead went from 12 to 3. It's like, so what's the difference between 20 minutes left on the first half clock and 20 minutes left on the second half clock? Like, you can only go to that well so many times before you start to lose people. As far as like not playing well in the first half and then going into halftime and there's a fiery speech or someone, as you said, test someone's manhood. Like, that only works so many times, and they've already used it 4 times this season or 5 times. And now the season's on the brink. I mean, honestly, I don't want to say the season is over because that would be ridiculous to say with 21 games left, but they're going to have to really, really play well in ACC play to find a way into the into the NCAA tournament, which is something I don't think anybody was expecting a month ago. And they still have a Q1 game on Saturday against UCLA. But overall, I think this game just highlighted what we've already seen this season and confirmed that this team just really is going nowhere pretty fast.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you said. And shout out to the 320-some folks, hardcore folks in the chat. Sherrell, you mentioned the first half starts. I don't understand. I mean, you've watched a ton of ball. I've watched a ton of ball. And you mentioned the difference in the first half and the second half. It's not the starting lineup. It's not I don't know what it is. And I can't understand why Hubert Davis and his staff haven't figured it out. And that's probably the most disturbing thing that for me watching this team, and to your point, it's rudderless, but it's also the same thing over and over. It doesn't matter who's out there on the court. It doesn't matter the rotations or the matchups or whatever. It's the same issue. And to me, and I flat out, that falls on the coaching. If they can't find some way to get this team, because this team clearly has the talent to compete with better teams. They have to be perfect. I mean, if they're not, they're going to lose, but they have the talent. But for this team to come out repeatedly and just look like they've looked, somebody in the chat's burning up my quote, you get what you allow, but I don't know if it's being allowed so much as being coached. I don't know any other way to put it, and it may be harsh, but that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, and the thing, I think what everybody is trying to reconcile is like, it'd be easier to understand if they just lost every game by 20 and laid down and didn't show bursts of 5, 10, 15 minutes here and there where they can play against a top 10 team in the country, against a top 15, 20 team like Michigan State, against a top 10 team like Alabama, or a top 25 team like Dayton, or a number 1 team like Kansas. Like, they've shown that they can do it in stretches, but then all of a sudden it's like they just go away from what works, or they can't quite figure it out. It is confounding, I think would be the word I would use, because in those first halves, it's like they play great defense for maybe the first 90 seconds, maybe the first 2 minutes, and then team hits a 3 or they get up 7-2, and you can almost see the confidence like leave their body on the court, like physically leave their body and go out of the stadium. And before you know it, it's 15-4, and then it's 22-9, and then it's 25-12, and they're having to dig out of these holes. So, yeah, they've got to figure something out. I don't know what it is, but that is the job of the head coach and the coaching staff, is to uh, identify those weaknesses and try to coach around them. And I think right now they're not able to. It's like we keep saying, it's the same thing. It's getting down early, the slow starts. It's not being able to get a rebound to kind of save their life at points. And then it's like they're giving up layup lines defensively. I mean, this is, I think, the sixth team to score 90 or more points against Carolina this season. I'll look at it real quick. Live radio. So Kansas had 92, Dayton had 90, Michigan State had 94, Alabama had 94, and Florida has 90. So yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams have scored 90 or more points against UNC in the first 11 games of the season, which is just, that kind of tells a lot of the story. When you can't stop anybody, it's very hard to win. Not to be that simplistic. But then, Tommy, you look at the three-point shooting. You want to read out those? Do you have the stats up?
I don't have them right in front of me.
Okay.
If you've got them, go for it.
Yeah.
I've got a couple stats here I want to hit, but you go.
Yeah, so Florida was 11 of 32 from three. Not great, but not terrible. UNC 5 of 28. So UNC, if I can do some quick math, was minus 18 from three, and that's kind of been a recurring theme in these losses. No one really outside of R.J. Davis has been a consistent shooter. And even him, he hasn't shot well. I guess Ian Jackson has come along. I'll give him that. Ian Jackson has come along as a shooter, and Seth Trimble is a good shooter. I just wish he would shoot a little bit more sometimes because he's shown that he can make it. So I think, those are the two or the three glaring issues: the rebounding, just the lack of defensive resistance at all, and then the shooting.
Yeah, when you look at a stat that's important to me, Sherrell, second half rebounding, second half offensive rebounding. When the game's on the line, Florida had 10 offensive rebounds to Carolina's 4. And I'd wager 6 of those were in the last 4 minutes, 3 minutes for Florida. It's just, they talk about Hubert Davis harps on rebounding every time he's asked about anything. It is rebounding and it is defense. And those are the things that are getting Carolina beat in these late close games. And like we said, it falls on him to figure out how to fix it. But Sherrell, I wanted to ask you, and I'm talking to Sherrell McMillan here on the Inside Carolina Postgame. I feel like we're repeating a bunch of stuff. There's 500 plus people in the chat. Bless you guys for joining us. It's amazing that folks want to come listen to us. It's really Sherrell talk about this. But Sherrell, when you look at it, Ian Jackson is a bright spot. Talk about his play, because he went full on Rucker Park here in some of those things. I say you just unleash him fully, let him go and see what happens. At least you can have some positivity there. Just speak to what you saw from him and his progression, because outside of being able to create your own shot, they're not doing a ton of stuff that gets them open looks. And we can talk about that more in just a second.
And that's why he's so valuable to UNC, because right now people aren't respecting Elliot Cadeau as a shooter. So it's back to the defense from last year where they're sagging off of him, which is clogging the lane. So he's not able to create kind of his own shots. Like as we said with Trimble, he needs to be more aggressive. I think that's what UNC needs from him. And so that leaves R.J. Davis and Ian Jackson as really the two offensive creators who can go get their shot pretty much anytime they want to. So he's going to have to get more minutes. I mean, I don't know who it comes at the expense of, but what they're doing isn't working. And when what you're doing isn't working, then you try something else. And again, I think that's why it's confounding. I wish I could share, because I take notes, especially when I'm doing the podcast. I wish that you could see the notes I had after the first half. And like, it was not pretty, because the game wasn't pretty, and they were playing just some of the worst Carolina basketball I've witnessed. I mean, it was just lethargic and any other negative adjective you want to use. But then they flip it, so it's just it's maddening, because the lack of consistency is the issue. It's not.
Mhm.
I would say it's not necessarily an overall roster talent problem. Yes, there is a huge gaping hole down there in the post. I think we all recognize that, but they've shown an ability to mitigate it and play well against some of the top teams in the country in stretches. And it's just like, how do they unleash that where they're able to do it for 10 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes or, in a perfect world, 35 or 40 minutes. And it just hasn't happened. And because of that, because of these huge deficits, when you're down 18, 17, 21, 14, 18, 15 against these top 15, top 20 type teams, it's not quite impossible to come back, but it's very, very difficult, and you leave yourself absolutely zero margin for error. So it's like, if they could, you don't want them to get down at all, but if they could be down 8 or 6 or 9 instead of 18, that changes the math a little bit. But it's I'm struggling for like positivity in this aspect, because they've lost 5 games and we're not at Christmas yet. They've lost 5 games already, and they're all to good teams. And we've seen the ACC is just not a good conference this year. So what is the path to making the NCAA tournament for UNC? It's They have to beat UCLA. There's no way around that. They have to beat them. And that's the other thing too, Tommy. Let me go back. They are just as aware of all these things as we are. They know about net rankings. They know about KenPom. They know they've lost 4 games to good teams. They know all that. And so it makes it even more mysterious when you come out like that in a game could help save your season. Like, how it just does not compute. It doesn't compute. And frankly, it was an embarrassment, I would say, for Carolina basketball, the way they played in that first half. Now, they got back into the game, but it's becoming too often where we're on this podcast, or other people are talking about Carolina basketball, and they say, "Oh, what great fight from Carolina basketball to get back into the game." Those plucky underdogs from Chapel Hill. Like, no, man, this is Carolina basketball, and getting down 18, fighting back, and almost winning is not what Carolina basketball is supposed to be. There's a standard of excellence that's supposed to be Carolina basketball, and that standard is not being met right now.
Yeah, when you look at it, a couple points I want to get your take on when I was listening to you talk about that is, is it easier to play hard and to play well when there's nothing left to lose and you're down by 15? Because it seems like they come out, they don't play good, they're lethargic, whatever, they get way behind, and then they're like, what the hell? What we got to lose? We might as well. And then they get up. They get up. They were up, 81-77. And then they go right back in that shell. I mean, is there something to that these guys, everybody talks about front runners, but Carolina has not front ran well at all, but also they don't start playing until they're way down. I'm at the place you are, trying to figure out, how does this happen? And to your point there you also made, is they know that this season is going to prematurely end if they don't beat UCLA, because the ACC is garbage.
I mean, if we're being honest, like, I, if we're being honest, do we really think that North Carolina, the way it's playing right now, that this season will have anything of consequence happen? Now, famous last words. The last time I said that was when they lost to Pitt, and then they went on their run. But there's nothing in particular that they're really doing well right now consistently. And so it's like, okay, they beat UCLA. Great. That's a quad 1 win. But do you really believe that they can go into Louisville as presently constructed and beat Louisville in a tough environment? Do you think they can go I think they play at Clemson. You think they can go to Clemson and beat a Clemson team that's ranked and that has some size inside? Like, do we think they can go to NC State and beat NC State, a team that has some athletes and had their number in the ACC championship game last year? Don't even talk about the other team. It's just, I think it's, everybody has to, again, we started the season as people who follow UNC and cover UNC. It's like, okay, this team can be a second weekend team with some luck. It could reach a Final Four. We'll see. And then after Maui, it was kind of like, okay, this team is not quite what we thought they were going to be, but the schedule is tough, and maybe they can get a couple, have a few more chances for wins. Maybe they can, turn it around and be a, top 6 or 7 seed in the NCAA tournament. And then they lost to Alabama. They looked more than pedestrian against Georgia Tech despite winning. And then they give up 90 points again in what was essentially a home game to Florida. So now it's kind of like recalibrate once again to, well, can they play spoiler? Because I just don't see a way with the way the ACC is built, with just not many tough games, and with only one real Q1 opportunity out of conference left, that UNC is going to have enough when it gets to Selection Sunday. They're going to show UNC and they're going to say, well, they were 1-5 in non-conference against Kim Palm top 50 or Q1 or whatever, and it's kind of starting to play out like the NIT season 2 years ago. I mean, they can turn it around. There's still plenty of basketball left, but the trajectory they're on is not a good one.
Yeah, and what you want to see is just go full 40 minutes of hell and play that way, and maybe they have opportunities to win games. You can't get stuck in a half-court game with this Carolina team, because most every team they play, we used to say the ACC doesn't have any dominant bigs, really. There's a couple teams that have dominant bigs, but it seems to me like every team Carolina's played has gone and plucked some big guy off the street somewhere, and he's been able to be dominant, or at least very good, against Carolina's bigs. Here's a stat for you. RJ and Seth Trimble combined for 15 rebounds tonight. How many did Jalen Washington and Jalen Withers combined for? And granted, they didn't play a ton, but how many?
4.
5. You got your two biggest guys on the team getting 5 rebounds when you got RJ and Seth Trimble doing it. Sherrell, I don't know what else we need to talk about. There's 666, but I'm going to let you keep going because I like this. One thing about having Sherrell on these shows is he brings a sense of calm and a sense of settle down. Here's how it is on him. I'm not feeling it tonight, Sherrell.
Well, I mean, this is how it is. This is where Carolina is right now. They're, Bill Parcells, you are what your record says you are. You're a 6-5 team whose best win was a miraculous comeback against Dayton and Maui. That's who North Carolina is right now. Yes, they've come close against Kansas. Yes, they came close against Michigan State. Yes, they came close against Florida, but close isn't going to get you into the tournament. Wins get you into the tournament. And that's why this schedule, I'm not gonna take a shot at the schedule, because you play what's in front of you. I think this, and I think what everybody's trying to reconcile too, Tommy, is that despite everything we've said about how the roster is built, about how lethargic they look at times, about how terrible the shooting has been, about how they make some careless turnovers, about how they can't close out games well, they're still like in most of these games somehow. I'm not sure exactly how, but they're still in a lot of these games and they just can't close it out. So it keeps you from completely burying them, because you've seen, as I said, what they can do in these small stretches when they are engaged. And like, I try not to be body language guy, but it's such a marked difference after a couple shots when it go in, what their defense looks like. And that shouldn't be the case. And I'll give you, we've kind of been tough on Hubert Davis, so I'll give him credit on that. Like he always says, your defensive effort is one of the few things that you can control. Sometimes shots don't go in. For example, the 3 that they drew up for RJ, that was a really good play. I thought it was well executed. RJ Davis, who had probably his best game of the season, one of his better games in a while, had a not wide open but a semi-open look for 3 to put you up 1 under 1 minute left. That's a good play. That's a good design. The shot just didn't go in. It's the other stuff that's controllable: the turnovers, the mistakes, the missed ends of 1-and-1s, the missed free throws, the under 4 offense. Like all of those are the things that are the issues, and it's like they just can't get over it. You go back all the way to Alabama last year with the under 4 offense, and something just does not click in those situations for whatever reason. So that's one thing. On a positive, I think you can say that RJ Davis was as Rob Harrington likes to say, he again lost himself in the competitive spirit of the game. That was the RJ Davis that we've seen over the last couple of years. He had 8 rebounds, 29 points. Really put UNC on his back and was kind of determined to get them over the top, but just wasn't able to do it. So I guess that's a positive, that RJ Davis kind of looked like himself. Ian Jackson played really well offensively. That's a positive. I think Seth Trimble has been a positive all season and really is North Carolina's most consistent two-way player. But outside of that, there's just work to be done for this team, and it's just going to take something that we haven't seen. It's going to take one of those 19, 18, 20 game winning streaks to get them into the tournament. And I just don't know. I shouldn't say don't know. I don't think this team is capable of that. So we'll just have to see what happens moving forward. But got to reassess because the goals entering the season look like they are long gone. And so what do you play for now? How do you get yourself motivated, and how do you keep this from spiraling into something worse, something that we haven't seen in 15 or 20 years?
Yeah, it's the controllables, to your point, are unbelievable. And I was going to make that point getting out of here, is that the difference in how they play when the ball's going in the basket versus how they play when it's not is unacceptable on any level of basketball. And we see it night in and night out. You see heads droop when balls don't get in the basket. You see lack of defensive effort. You see lack of boxing out, lack of everything. And this team is just not good enough talent-wise and skill-wise to be sort of half rear-ended on either end of the
Oh
court.
no, especially defensively. I mean, like
Yeah.
they have to play desperate defensively, and you saw it when they got back into the game. It
Yeah,
was
and they
it
did
was
it. That's
it
the
was
thing. That's the
it
maddening part.
it was Drake Powell, rotating over to get a block. I mean, he was on the other block, and he rotated over at least a good 15 feet in maybe a second or two, and got a block. Seth Trimble was getting in passing lanes. Like that is how they have to play the entire game because of the deficits they have, and the way the roster is built. They have to do that, and I don't know. Maybe it's not possible. Maybe it's asking too much of them to do that for 40 minutes. But that's their path to victory, because the offense, even though it doesn't look great, they're putting up 85, 86, 87 points almost every night. So it is a defensive issue. And I mean, I don't get paid millions of dollars. I don't have a fix, so maybe the coaching staff does. But there's so much work to be done, and I don't think they have it in them.
Yeah. Uh, we'll see. There's more LaSalle's left on the schedule than there is Florida's, but they got a big one in New York City in Madison Square Garden against UCLA on Saturday. Anything left, Sherrell? I just don't. For me, the whole point and the theme of this show is this team is so much less than the sum of the parts, and that falls on the coaching staff to get that done and get it put together in whatever way. These guys, it's not like they started practicing on October 15th and the season started on November 1st and they're just still trying to figure it out. This has been a work in progress for quite a long time. And this second half against Florida and that second half against Kansas are starting to look like that 5-week run they had in 2022, and the rest of the game is looking like the rest of the last few years, and that for Carolina fans should be very troubling. So figure out how to end it on a positive note, Sherrell. Ian Jackson, Rucker Park ball.
I mean,
It was fun to watch.
yeah, it was. I mean, it was some New York Lightning coming out, his AAU team. But he's that talented of an offensive scorer, so you've got to find minutes for him. But yeah, man, I just I don't want to say I'm at a loss for words, but I feel today kind of how I felt about the UNC football program after the loss to UVA in 2023, where it's just like, okay, that's it. It's right there in front of you. You just can't grab it, and I feel like that's kind of going to be the story of the season. Maybe they'll turn it around and do something miraculous, but it just feels like it's just not there, and I don't know how you get it after some of the losses they've had. Especially the close losses to some of these good teams. Michigan State, was a 3-point game. Kansas was a 3-point game. This was a 6-point game. So it's tough. I would hate to be in that locker room right now because you've got to somehow get yourself together after another tough, heartbreaking loss. Go to your hotel, spend the night, fly to New York, and get ready for a game on Saturday against UCLA, which again will be for your season. So that's tough. That's a lot of pressure. But the positive, like I said, RJ Davis, put the team on his back, played well. Ian Jackson played well. I think Seth Trimble did a lot of good things well too.
Indeed, Carolina falls to Florida 90-84 in the Jumpman Invitational. Play UCLA on Saturday. You
Oh,
mentioned the foot.
one last thing. One last thing. I'm sorry.
I love it. I love it.
One
Sherrell,
last
look,
thing.
look, folks. Hold on a second. Let me explain to people as we're 25 minutes in. I had to drag Sherrell off the bench for this show here. And this is why, folks. Listen up.
Like I said, you should have seen it. If we had this podcast after the first half, that'd have not been
Oh,
great.
it was fire them all into the sun, right?
No comment. Those will stay in my notes, my notebook over here. But no, I see people saying, is it the coaches or is it the players? This is systematic. This is not one thing. This is everyone top down has to do better or has to be better, whether it's playing defense, whether it's drawing up plays, whether it's substitutions, whatever you're responsible for when it comes to Carolina basketball, you've got to do better. And it's easy for me to say from my couch, like, oh, you guys need to do better. But I don't think I'm saying anything, and I wouldn't say anything that I don't think they're saying to themselves. That's kind of like my personal rule. Like, don't come after anybody personally, and don't have any criticism that you wouldn't tell them to their face or that they probably aren't saying themselves in the locker room. I think pretty much everything that we've talked about over the last 25 minutes has probably been said at some point, whether it's a press conference or in the locker room or just to each other. They've just got to be better, especially on the defensive end. That's all I got.
When you wonder whose issue it is, it's usually the man in the mirror. And that applies to everybody, even us at times. Carolina falls to 6-5. Like you said, it's not even Christmas, and Carolina basketball has lost 5 games. You mentioned football. Hubert Davis has enjoyed toiling in a sort of secret over the last couple of weeks with Carolina's noise on the football side of things. Maybe a little more of that can help this team get out of the funk as they go to UCLA and then look to the ACC schedule and all coming after Christmas. Sherrell, as always, it's a pleasure to talk to you. Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com, sponsors of the podcast. Go see them on Franklin Street or order your Christmas stuff. Can't promise you'll get it by Christmas at this point, but they do have the Bill Belichick sleeveless hoodies and all that kind of stuff. And then Congruity, Matt at congruityhr.com for your small to mid-sized business needs. If you're going to start out 2025 with a small to mid-sized business, hit up Matt at congruityhr.com. Let them lead the way, make you a big national brand as they've done for themselves. That's Sherrell McMillan. I'm Tommy Ashley. It's been the Inside Carolina Postgame. We'll talk to you Saturday after the UCLA game in New York City. Thanks, everybody.